Struggled for a really long time because I was always searching for things outside of myself to be the thing that made me feel better or to prove my worth. Spent 37 years running away from my feelings, trying not to feel anything. But when you're in such profound grief, it's so hard to repress your feelings.
And welcome everyone to another episode of Humanity 2.0 podcast. You didn't know, but there was a bunch of audio drama, but now we're in a good place. So let's welcome Angie Hawkins. Angie, you're an author, you're a speaker, you're an incredible human in this wacky thing we call life. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me. Also, I think the audio drama just speaks to the human experience of things not going the way we always expect.
That's true. That is so true. And you know what? I think we would get an award for how we attack that. You were super optimistic and you were like, what can we do? And I was doing things and pressing buttons. So I think we made a good team. Tell us all about you.
Well, I don't even know where to begin. Well, first of all, I'm an inner glow coach. I'm also an author and speaker. My journey on this career trajectory started with the writing of my book, Running in Slippers, which covers a really train wreck period of my life, which I'll go into in a minute. But the reason that I wrote it is because I feel like what we see on social media is profoundly filtered and edited. And even in real life, we all wear a mask. Like if someone asks you how you're doing, even if you're having a really shitty day, the go-to answer is usually like, oh, I'm fine, everything's fine. So I feel like we aren't talking about real life enough. So my book, it's extremely vulnerable. And the reason that I wrote it that way is to encourage connection through vulnerability, because I feel like society, we're not really connecting because we're wearing all these filters. And I feel like it got even worse with COVID. I feel like we've been even more disconnected since then. So my whole brand is about like talking about life and real life and challenges, the things that we're not actually really talking about.
That sounds amazing. It reminds me of the dog meme, you know, with the dumpster fire and he's like, everything's fine.
Yeah.
That's so hilarious. I've worked in the social media space previously, so I know exactly what you're talking about when it comes to filters and nothing really being what it seems, especially because it's edited down. And what you see is never really what's going on or what went on, 5 minutes prior to recording. You mentioned COVID and people getting even more disconnected. Some would argue that people got closer. In what ways did they become more disconnected?
Well, I just feel like we got more comfortable with not socializing. I feel like mental health issues actually rose during that time period, but nobody was really talking about that either. I feel like a lot of people struggled with loneliness or just the confinement of things. And in such an accelerated time of disconnectedness, we weren't even really talking about it. I do agree there were situations where people came closer together because depending on how you were hunkering down, like during the extreme quarantine period, I think there was an opportunity to become closer because, for example, all of the gyms were closed. So there were these 3 other girls that I worked out with, and one of the girls had a garage with equipment. So I actually got really close to them during that time period because they were like some of the very few people I was hanging out with. So there were opportunities for connection, but I just feel like in terms of really addressing our mental health issues or like what was the profound effects of our real life, we weren't really talking about.
That reminds me of a film festival that was held online during COVID. A bunch of directors and artists decided that they wanted to connect via media. And so they held an online festival, but the whole thing centered around COVID and how disconnected we become. And it was really interesting to see all kinds of interpretations about, loneliness and isolation. And then in some cases, community through isolation. So yeah, it was amazing to see, people still grasping at connection in different ways during COVID. But at the same time, mental health was a big part. And you're right, there wasn't a lot of talking about it. It's even after the fact, after COVID, it's still, something that doesn't come up a whole lot. What impacted the person during COVID and after, and how it changed their lives and how they operate even now. So that's definitely true.
Yeah, because I think there's lasting effects to that. And I don't know if this is directly related. It could just be the era, but I think younger kids, I feel like they're more connected to like their phones and technology than actual people. I also, like myself, this isn't necessarily like a mental health issue, but I used to be really good at recognizing faces, like even if I had only met someone, like, but my facial recognition totally went away with the whole wearing mask era. Like I do not recognize faces anymore, even if I have seen someone several times. And I'm also curious about like the long-term effects, because I don't know if we would even see this yet, but I remember one time during COVID when we were wearing masks, I live in a building, so I have to take the elevator to come home. And one time there was this woman, she was holding a baby, and I smiled at the baby, but then I was like, the baby can't even tell that I'm smiling, right? Because I'm wearing a mask. But it made me like go into this deep thought of what are the effects of babies not having facial recognition of strangers? And I don't know, maybe we would see the effects because those babies would be 5 years old now, but I don't know. Like, I think there's so many unintended consequences to it.
That's true. I never thought about that either. I mean, babies, I mean, they're very dependent on visual cues and
Yeah.
shapes and colors. And yeah, so that means a lot about their growth. That would be really interesting to study for sure.
Yeah.
One of my favorite questions on the show, which usually kicks it off, is the question of humanity. How do you define humanity?
I would define humanity as connectedness, because ultimately we're all going through extremely similar human experiences. I don't know, sometimes, but for whatever reason, there's a vulnerability to it. So we're not sharing it with each other. So actually, I would call it like an underground connectivity, because it's like we're all connected because we're human beings, yet we have these masks and like our shields up, and we are resisting that connection because we want to have this perfect facade or whatever. But it's like those human things about us are what make us connected, because at the end of the day, we're all the same, even though our experiences may not be totally the same. Like, so for instance, everyone usually has an example of grief that they have gone through, or like a major life experience. So there's like all these like similar themes that we experience, but we really don't join together in any of that.
Why do you think it is that we try to hide them from each other? And then also, can you tell me of a time where you did that?
Yeah, well, I did it like most of my life, and that's just it. I can really only speak to my own experience, but I think I actually already know, because I've been having more of these conversations. It's relatable to other people, because I always wanted to have this facade of like, I wanted to look like I had my shit together and that I knew what I was doing. And, you know, I didn't want people to see my imperfections, but that's what makes us human. So that's why there is this connection and vulnerability, because it's actually relatable. Whereas when you're putting on these filters and edits and pretending everything's fine, it's like people really can't get to know the real you. And I lived my life like that for a long time. My story originates in childhood because I had really emotionally unavailable parents. So, and I understand what that means now, but as a child, the way I interpreted the situation is that I developed a belief that I didn't deserve to be loved. So I went through life, you know, being a people pleaser, because I didn't feel like I was inherently worthy of things. I was always like chasing and looking for things outside of me. And instead of embracing who I was always conforming to things outside of myself. And I didn't ever feel like seen for who I was. But on the other hand, I wasn't really letting people see who I really was. And I struggled with that for a really long time. And I think it just comes down to vulnerability, because we don't want people to see our imperfections.
If you take a moment just to think back, can you recall why or what happened that had you feel you didn't deserve love?
A big part of it was both of my parents were emotionally unavailable, however, in different ways. My dad was an alcoholic, so he was physically present in the house, but he emotionally was not there. However, my mom, she was more, what is the word? Enmeshing, I think is the word, but that's also emotionally unavailable in a different way, because she was like so controlling. She never was really interested in like learning about who I was or what I liked. She always just wanted me to conform to whatever she wanted me to do. So it was emotionally unavailable in a different way. So I just never really felt worthy of love as I was. I felt like I had to conform these roles to please my parents. And then, you know, that just like exacerbated into other areas of my life. But then my mom was also extremely critical. So it's like nothing I ever did was ever good enough. So it's like I was always on this constant, like, metaphorical hamster wheel of like trying to earn the compliment or the praise or whatever instead of the criticism. So I felt like I deserved the criticism and I didn't deserve the praise or words of encouragement.
And then what along your life helped you to overcome or to heal and live with these truths?
Yeah, so unfortunately, struggled for a long time because your beliefs dictate your behaviors and that dictates the experiences that you draw into your life. So I struggled for a really long time because I was always searching for things outside of myself to be the thing that made me feel better or to prove my worth. And it's really an unfulfilling lifestyle, but I didn't know anything different. And I felt like that's all I deserved. The biggest turning point came in 2017. My boyfriend broke up with me and then my dad passed away. And I was 37 and I had spent 37 years running away from my feelings, trying not to feel anything. But when you're in such profound grief, it's so hard to repress your feelings, which is not healthy anyway, by the way. So I was actually forced to feel my feelings, but I didn't have the tools for emotional regulation. So I just basically felt like shit for the rest of that year. And then the new year came and I was like, okay, I want to make some changes in my life. And I was living in Chicago and I decided that I wanted to move to Hawaii, which was well-intentioned in the sense that I was like being proactive and actually taking agency over my life. But it wasn't well-intentioned in the sense that I was like still reaching for things outside of myself to be the thing that made me feel better. And people do this in other various ways too, like, right? Like people reach for like drugs or shopping or whatever to be the thing that makes them feel better. So I was like doing this with external things as well. But then when I moved here, you can't move away from your problems. So I still had the exact same problems. And then I developed a whole new roster of problems. It was hard for me to make friends. When I moved here, I was able to work remote and keep my job, but there was like this huge management shakeup at work, which threatened my role. So I lived in constant fear of losing my job. So, and then like the next 2 years, it was like thing after thing after thing. So I was always grasping for things outside of myself because I still hadn't learned my lesson at this point. And then COVID happened. So again, like we were just talking about that at the beginning, I don't think I have to explain how that made it worse because it was just like the isolation and restrictions just were so overwhelming. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was the end of a relationship during COVID. And I had this moment where, and we all have these moments where everything is so overwhelming and you feel like you can't take anymore. But then on top of that, it was just the sheer feeling of hopelessness because nothing had been going well and I truly did not see any hope for the future. So I intentionally overdosed on my anxiety medication. And I was unconscious in my bathroom for a day and a half. I spent another day and a half in the hospital. And when I was released from the hospital, I called a friend and I told her everything that happened. And she was like, she told me, it's not your time. And like, that was so profound to me in the moment. And it sent a chill through my body. And so that's when I decided like, I need to make some changes in my life. And I need to make them the right way because any attempt that I had made to heal through traditional therapy or whatever before was not working. So I invested in myself and hired a coach. And that's what I call my healing journey in earnest because he helped me see like how I was living my life was basically rooted in this limiting belief of that I didn't deserve to be loved. So he helped bring that to my awareness and actually changed how I showed up in my life.
Do you feel like, I guess, the culmination of all of that grief and your internal struggles that you didn't deal with, you brought them from place to place, and because they were not dealt with, it just ended up in that bathroom?
I think so, because one of the greatest skills I have learned since then is how to feel my feelings and feel safe in my body while feeling my feelings. Because, yeah, some things that we feel are not desirable, but if you just keep stuffing them down and repressing them, they will catch up with you in a way that you probably won't find very pleasant. So it's easier just to actually feel them and learn how to feel safe in your body so that they don't catch up to you in that way.
And for folks listening that might be in the same place, what would be your encouragement to them as far as feeling their feelings and tools they can use?
Actually, this is my number one. I don't call it a trick because it's actually a scientific fact, but basically the physiological feelings in our bodies that are triggered from like a fight or flight type of response, they only last for 90 seconds. The reason why they tend to last longer is because the stories that we like ruminate on and feed into the feeling. So for instance, I used to have a lot of anxiety attacks, and they would be triggered by an event, but then I would have this ruminating story in my head that would just contribute to the feeling. And sometimes it would go on for days on end. But the trick is just temporarily just get rid of the story and focus on the feeling and the sensations in your body. If you're just focus on those and focus on, because like for me, I get anxiety in my chest and sometimes it feels like I'm having a heart attack. But if I can like get that logical part of my brain to turn on and realize like I'm not dying, I'm safe in my body, it's going to pass in 90 seconds. It can pass in 90 seconds, and then you're in this calmer state to actually deal with whatever that story was in your head. Because if you're in this aroused physical state trying to deal with this, story that has an emotional intensity to it, that's just like adding fuel to the fire. Whereas if you're calm, you can look at the story that has the emotional intensity with a more logical standpoint. And that's the simplified version. I just made it sound like super easy, and once you get in the habit of doing it, it is a lot easier.
Yeah, no, it sounds like something that we could definitely use for sure on the daily basis.
Yeah.
After this experience, how much longer then did you begin to put your book together and decide, oh, hey, I want to put this down into words for other people?
So the idea for the book actually came in the period after my dad passing, because we live in a just get over it society. So after about 2 months, people stopped asking me how I was doing. They expected me to be over it. And my dad had died, so I was not over it, which regardless of who you are as a person, to be over something like that after 2 months, I don't think is reasonable at all. Like, we're human beings, we have feelings, everyone can grieve in their own time. But anyway, it was just kind of expected, like, oh, you should be over it by now. So again, I had to wear that mask, like everything's okay, because nobody really wanted to hear about it anymore. And I just remember I would feel so disconnected, because you go on Instagram and everyone's posting like the highlight reels of their life. And, you talk to your friends or whoever, and everyone's just talking about the good things that are happening in their lives. And I just remember thinking, there have to be other people who are feeling the way I do. Like, I can't be the only person who grieves for longer than 2 months. And I just felt certain that there was that layer, like the underground connectedness. I just felt certain that there were other people like me and we're just not talking about it. So I had the idea to write a book that's like really vulnerable and like talks about the things that we don't really talk about. The problem is, back then, I was terrified of allowing myself to be seen. Like, I thought it was a good idea, yet the thought of like putting my own vulnerable story out there was just way too terrifying. So it was just an idea that I had for years. And then when I hired my coach, because this is when I was like fresh out of the hospital, and life at that time felt extremely fragile. My only goal was to make it through the day, which is like a really hard place to be in, because that's like true survival mode. But my very first call with my coach, he was like, if you could do anything and didn't have to worry about money, what would you do? And the very first thing I thought of was the book. And I started telling him, I was like, yeah, I want to write this book. It's about real life and it's vulnerable. Then I'll do all these book tours, and there'll be safe spaces for people to actually like talk about things that happen in real life. And I'm like telling him this whole thing. And he was like, did you notice how lit up you just got when you were talking to me about that? And I did notice the state change. So because I needed something extra to like have a purpose, because the work that I was doing with him was a process. And I was like, I need something right now to give me more of a purpose. So that's when I decided, like, I'm going to write the book. I was like, I don't have to publish it. I just want to write the whole thing. But then, so that's when I started truly writing the book. But then by the time I finished, I was in a place where I felt more courageous and available to allow myself to be seen. So I did ultimately publish it.
Grief is a lifelong process, doesn't stop after 2 months. For a lot of people, losing their family members, whether it's during COVID or now, there are a lot of folks passing. It just feels like it's way more longer than a few months. While you were writing your book, did you feel like some healing and some, I guess, experiences being laid to rest while you're writing this book?
It's interesting because a lot of people ask me this question, and I think it was because, like, time period wise, I was still too close to the experiences, because I would actually argue some things re-traumatized me, but I didn't find it healing at all, is my short answer. But in hindsight, in a way, I think it did contribute to my healing, because you have to feel things to move through them, and it forced me to feel things that I hadn't truly healed from. So in the moment, it felt like it was re-traumatizing, but ultimately I think it was healing, because it was forcing me to feel those experiences until they no longer triggered me anymore.
Then did you go on tour and create those safe spaces for people?
Well, so that's still part of my long-term goal. I have done some local events that have gone really well, because one of the things that we do at the end, I have this exercise. It's called Instagram versus reality. And everyone has to show a picture. It doesn't necessarily have to be Instagram, but a picture that you have somehow presented publicly or posted on Instagram, where you're seemingly happy and everything's fine, but then tell the backstory of what was really going on. And that exercise is so profound, because you see like the happiest pictures, and then you hear the stories about what's really going on behind the scenes. And if you think about it, any picture on Instagram that we see or anywhere else, like, there could be a backstory like that related to it, but you don't know unless you have these conversations. So I would like to do more of those outside of local events, like to just meet more people across the world, but that's still part of my long-term goal.
Do you recall an example story that you heard that was really moving?
Oh, there's so many. I remember one, her and her husband, they went on a staycation. Hilton has a really cool hotel. It's called Hilton Hawaiian Village, like right by the ocean. So they did a staycation at Hilton Hawaiian Village. So the picture is like from their balcony of the beach and like the scenery. But she was a recovering alcoholic, and she had just quit drinking. So she was going through withdrawal, and she was really depressed, and like their room, like there was some mix up with the room or whatever, so they didn't get the room that they wanted. But it was mostly the feelings about, she wasn't happy because she was like still dealing with her sobriety journey. But again, it's like you never would have saw that from the picture, because it looks like they're having like this amazing staycation at the Hilton right by the beach.
That's crazy. And you live in Hawaii, correct?
Yes.
But to a lot of us, that's like the happiest place ever.
I get so many comments about like, oh, like you must be so happy living there, or like people think I have the perfect life because I live in Hawaii. And it's like, I'm not going to lie. It is nice that the weather is nice almost every single day, but that's not what makes your life perfect. And because my attempt happened when I lived in Hawaii. So that just goes to show, like, where you live does not determine your mental state. I think it can enhance it or decrease it for sure, but like your mental state is dependent on your internal world. It's not the weather. But I get that all the time. People think my life is perfect, or I even had a few comments when I published the book. These were actually family members, like, well, I don't understand why you're so depressed, because like you have a perfect life. And it's like, my life is not perfect.
I know some folks that live in Hawaii, and they would say the same, that, you know, it isn't the perfect place that we all think it to be. I mean, no place is perfect.
Yeah, well, also, and this is what I try to explain to people, you know, I have a full-time job, I have life responsibilities. So just that alone is so much different than the experience of being on vacation, because on vacation, you have all day, every day to do what you want. but already like my life responsibilities cut out a huge chunk of my day.
Just observing humanity around you where you are now, do you find differences between people where you live now versus people where you lived before?
Yeah, because I feel like there's more of a, and this is just like my own story, but I feel like there's more of a need to prove myself as a local. When I lived in Chicago, I feel like I was just kind of accepted in almost any environment that I went to. But here, when I first started surfing, it took me several years, and I'm not exaggerating, it took about 2 years for me to actually be accepted by the surf community. So it feels like it's this constant struggle to finally be accepted.
I'm still kind of stuck on, you're a surfer? What does that feel like to be on the waves and be in the water like that?
I love surfing. Surfing was my unintended consequence to COVID because everything was closed, like the beaches, the parks, hikes, everything, except the ocean, because the state doesn't have jurisdiction to just close the ocean. So people were still surfing. So I was like, I need to learn how to surf. And I used to be the kind of person, I don't know if you've ever heard of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. I definitely used to be a fixed mindset. Like if I wasn't immediately good at something, I would just quit. And so when I started surfing, which is extremely difficult, I was not immediately good at it, but I didn't quit because there was nothing else to do. Because it's like, I love being in the ocean and in nature. So it's like, if I quit surfing, then I'm right back to like not being able to do anything. So I only stuck with it for the purpose of being outside and being in nature. But then eventually I actually started to get better. And so surfing has actually taught me a growth mindset, and I've actually learned to enjoy the experience of learning. So that was the unintended consequence of COVID for me, was learning how to surf and actually learn about the growth mindset.
Did you have any profound thoughts while you were out there on the waves or just watching the sunset?
I have profound thoughts all of the time because there's so many analogies about surfing that directly correlate to life. One of my favorite ones that I think about a lot, I think it's actually just called the surfer's mindset. But when you're surfing and you're on the wave, you know the wave is going to end, but that doesn't stop you from enjoying the wave, because the entire time you're on it, you're like in the moment and you're enjoying the feeling of being on the wave, because there's nothing else like it. It feels like, what other opportunity can you have to basically walk on water, right? So it is this amazing feeling. And plus just like the energy of the ocean and all of it. But when you're on the wave, you're not thinking about it ending. You're just enjoying the moment. And that's such a good lesson to carry into your day-to-day life. And there's so many more, but that's my favorite one.
I love that. It really is how we should feel about life in general, because we only get the one wave. So that's amazing. Is there anything that comes to mind when you think of, all that you've been through that you just really want to scream out and have people hear? Any words of comfort or just anything that you want to share with everyone listening?
Yeah, I always like to reiterate, first of all, you are worthy, because I used to be in this place where I didn't even feel worthy of being happy and fulfilled. First of all, if you are alive on this planet, then you are inherently worthy of feeling that. And if you're not feeling it now, it is available to you. So, and by that, I mean, there is hope for the future. And I like to reiterate that because, my rock bottom came from a place of feeling hopeless. And that's such a dangerous place to be. And if I'm being honest with myself, that wasn't even the truth. That's just how I felt in the moment. So I wish there was someone like me who I could have listened to earlier to like give me that spark of hope. I just don't feel like there's enough people talking about, like, for instance, suicide is a very heavily censored topic. So I had never really heard anyone talk about it or their feelings leading up to it, and if they survived, like what does life look like on the other side, like, or just mental health in general. Like I had never really heard any stories from, like I was in this really deep, dark place and I was able to get out of it. So not having that open information sharing and not understanding that there really was hope for the future, that was not even available to me at that time.
Looking back on your own stories, or anything that comes to mind at the moment that you would share with people?
Just that there is hope. I know, like, in the moment, it just seems so dark, but it's because you're caught up in your emotions. And when your emotions have that much emotional intensity, they do seem factual. It does seem like this is how it is, and it feels like that feeling is never going to end. But it's like the waves of the ocean. Like sometimes they ebb and flow. Sometimes they're really strong, and sometimes they're calm. And you have to ride out that wave. And you don't always have to do it alone. In this day and age, there's plenty of places for help. And that's another thing I like to see, because back even 5 years ago, I don't feel like there were as many resources for mental health. It still could be better, but there are so many more available now. So if you need help, there are many, many resources. And if you are not sure, you can always reach out to me and I can help you.
And where can people reach out to you?
My website is runninginslippers.com, and there's information on the book. There's information on my current coaching program. And if you are struggling with something, I also offer a free, I call it a 60-minute Find Your Glow session. So for 60 minutes, we can work with whatever you're struggling with. And most people do have breakthroughs on this call, because 60 minutes is a good amount of time. And then once we discover, what your limiting belief is or whatever comes out of the breakthrough, I can give you recommendations for going forward, because my coaching program is not for everybody. So if it's not a good fit for you, I know other coaches, I know therapists, like there are resources that I can point you in the right direction.
So I have to ask, what does it feel like for you to go from your own personal darkness and struggle to now being able to help others in that same place and see them just become even the slightest bit more hopeful about their future? How does that feel for you?
The primary feeling that I get from all of it is just a huge sense of pride, because I was truly in a deep, dark place. So to be able to actually just take accountability for my life and get out of that victim mentality and turn things around to the point where I'm now actually helping other people is just such an amazing feeling.
Do you feel like that experience that you went through was necessary to be who you are right now?
Yes, because I have a lot of people ask me like, well, what would you change, or what advice would you give old versions of yourself? But I wouldn't change anything. As hard as it was, I wouldn't change anything, because it put me on the path that I'm on today, which is the path that I needed to be on. And I clearly wasn't listening to any of the signs before, so I needed a punch in the face from the universe. So I would not change a thing. But I do not recommend hitting rock bottom. So that's another reason I share my story, because I knew I was heading in that direction. I just didn't do anything about it. So if you know you're heading in that direction, get help now, because I will say it made it that much harder to pull myself out.
For some people, it's incredibly hard to get help. And even just talking to one person, could be anyone, doesn't have to be someone close, but just one person can help to get the words out there and to hear yourself say them. I think that's super important.
Everybody feels a certain way at some time or another. So you would be surprised if you really opened up to a safe person, like how compassionate and open they would be to hearing their story. And they probably experience the same things, because even I never really talked about my story until I published my book. But then I would have people say to me like, well, oh, this exact same thing happened to me. And I didn't realize how many other people were going through the exact same things. So if you're going through a really hard time, you would be surprised. Most other people have been there, whether they're talking about it freely or not.
Is there anything else from your book that you want to highlight? I really like the concept of, all those filters on social media. Does the book go into that a great deal, or is it like a mixture?
Not like explicitly. I try to tell the story as it's happening to me, so nothing's told from hindsight. I try to touch on themes that we all go through. So there's breakups. My dad died, so there's grief of dying. There's a major life transition of me moving from Chicago to Hawaii. I briefly covered friendship breakups. I wish I would have went into more detail, because I think that's another thing that we're not really talking about, but everybody experiences. What else? Yeah, the mental health issues. Actually, and also it discusses COVID, which in hindsight, I wish I would have written about it differently, because I feel like we've already forgotten about some of the nuances of that period. And because I glazed over the nuances thinking like, oh, everyone will know what this means, maybe I should revise that part. But anyway, it does cover COVID, but I don't think it covers it in the sense that would like bring you back into that moment, because I skip over all the nuances of like the mask and all the restrictions, but it does cover COVID too.
If you could share a message with humanity, what would you tell them?
I think instead of being divided, we should all just try to unite and love each other. There's so much hate and anger and judgment and all this other stuff, but at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And I think it would really raise the vibration of the universe, because there's so much like hate and stuff going on right now. But if we all just like had more love and respect for each other, it would really go a long way to raise the whole vibration of the universe.
For sure. And I love that you said humanity is connected, that underground connection. I think that is such a wonderful description of humanity. I feel like today's episode has been like a peeking into your humanity, which is awesome. Thank you for sharing your humanity with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I love this theme. Yeah, because at the end of the day, we're all the same.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, every episode, it feels different because, you know, we either will dive into your humanity or we'll talk about humanity as a concept at whole. Hearing other stories of other people and connecting with them, that makes all the difference. So
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and that's why I share my story. Like, we should all be doing this, and it's not just me, because we all have unique stories and can learn from each other. So yeah, I love what you're doing.
I hope that you have a great rest of your year, and it feels like, you know, life is a whole series of revisions. Your book may go through quite a few revisions, but it's all part of life. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys next time on another episode of Humanity 2.0. Don't forget to be good to other humans.